Marty, you're gonna have to do something about those clothes. You walk around town dressed like that, you're liable to get shot. Or hanged.
How do you wrap up a trilogy that wasn't even supposed to be a trilogy? How do you tie in all the loose ends without causing a major uproar with your fan base? And how the hell do you write a spoiler-free review for a movie that, spoiler alert, has to reference a previous film that can be spoiled? Let's find out. I'm Meffistoe. Like, share, and subscribe because this is my review of the movie Back to the Future Part 3.
I can't just send you back to the future.
Oh, I know he did send me back to the future, but I'm back. I'm back from the future.
Obviously, I need to make an exception this time around since I do have to discuss plot points that will spoil Part 2. So, go watch Part 2. Hell, go watch all 3 of them. Come back and listen to this review.
Iced tea?
Back to the Future 3 was shot back-to-back with Part 2. I discussed how these two movies took about 2 years in preparations in order to build the sets and make sure the scripts are done before even starting the shoot itself. The movie was released about 7 months after Part 2 came out, and as a kid I remembered it felt like ages and ages.
You're just not thinking fourth dimensionally.
Spoiler time, so be warned. When we left off the last time, Doc Brown was hit by lightning and sent back to 1880. And Marty was stuck in 1955 and in need of young Doc's help once again. The 1885, Doc left the DeLorean and sent instructions on how to fix it in order for Marty to get back to his own timeline. But alas, Marty discovers that the Doc is in serious jeopardy and decides to go back into the past against Doc's wishes and to try a rescue attempt.
After you fix the time circuits and put new tires on the DeLorean, I'm going back to 1885 and I'm bringing you home.
The problem begins when both Marty and Doc figure out that they're both stuck in the past and they need to come up with a solution that will take them back home, all the while dodging the danger from a familiar foe and trying not to do something stupid like fall in love with people from the past.
You meet the right girl, it just hits you. It's like lightning.
Marty, please don't say that.
Back to the Future Part 3 is roughly regarded as the least favorite of the trilogy. Maybe it was the unsatisfying ending or the fact that it was mostly old Western based. I have no idea. I always had a soft spot for it. Michael J. Fox, Leah Thompson, and Tom Wilson once again played multiple roles to complete the circular nature of this universe. James Tolkien, who played Principal Strickland, played the Sheriff Strickland in the Old West, just as an example.
And maintain discipline at all times. Remember that word. Discipline.
Wilson, who played Biff and Griff in the first 2 films, played the ancestor Buford and held his villainous status in the franchise. The odd thing is Leah Thompson. Originally, and in this movie, she plays Marty's mom, but in the Old West, she actually plays a McFly ancestor on his father's side. Like when I saw this for the very first time, I didn't really question it, but looking at this critically, it makes no real story sense. The only real reason she did this was because Leah Thompson was already getting paid, and Zemeckis wanted a familiar face to repeat a specific scene and that the audience have a familiar face to relate to that part of Marty's family.
You're safe and sound here now at the McFly farm.
McFly farm?
The only fresh face in the cast is Mary Steenburgen in the role of Clara Clayton, the only real complicating factor in going back into the future. I mean, the present. Back to the Future 3 also has kind of a weird legacy. The mere fact that it is situated in the Old West comes from Michael J. Fox, who answered the questions all the way back when they shot the first film. Zemeckis asked him what time period would he like to visit should he had a real time machine, and Fox quickly answered the Old West. Story-wise, that desire was slapped on Doc Brown back at the end of the second movie, but Zemeckis and Gale had that fact in the back of their minds, but they wrote the script accordingly. And the other side of that legacy was Zemeckis' push to have old Western actors in the film to create some sort of an authentic feel. Pat Bertram, Harry Carey Jr., and Dub Taylor playing the trio of old guys in the saloon were all old-school Hollywood Western actors. Zemeckis even went as far as to try and contact Ronald Reagan, who was just leaving the Oval Office, but that offer was rejected.
Why, I didn't know the circus was in town. Must have got that shirt off on a dead Chinese.
I mentioned this in my part 2 review that some of the reasons why people didn't seem to like that movie as much as they liked the original was the repeated jokes. And I talked about the symmetry that the two Bobs wrote into the script to make it feel like that time is cyclical and the same events seem to happen again and again, and roughly the same way. But you might remember that most of these things were laid down in part 2 and manifested in part 3. The manure dumping all over Biff was established in the original after that skateboard chase, but the line "Manure! I hate manure!" only entered the zeitgeist after part 2, and it manifested again in part 3.
I hate manure.
Marty playing the Crackshot video game in part 2 actually manifested again in part 3 with something more alive.
Where'd you learn to shoot like this?
7-Eleven.
When constructing this part of the story, Zemeckis had a lot of reverence to the old westerns of Hollywood. He made sure that these elements are represented in the movie. The duel at high noon, the homage to the spaghetti westerns, and the unnamed stranger character.
Clint Eastwood.
What kind of stupid name is that?
It just made the film feel a little bit more authentic for me and for the audience. It still was a sci-fi comedy, but it also was partially a real Hollywood Western. I mean, what could be more authentic than a rabbit for dinner with the shotgun pellets right in it? If you haven't seen any of the Back to the Future movies, please do not start with this one, because part 3 really does tie in loose ends that stretch back all the way into the original film. But most of all, part 2. Just as much as part 2 and 3 were shot back to back, they are one long continuing story that has been broken up into 2 separate movies. But unlike Peter Jackson's The Hobbit trilogy, it didn't stretch out too much with plot points that didn't really make sense. I will recommend you watch this movie though, but it cannot be as a standalone. It has to be a part of at least a duo, otherwise it will not make sense as a single movie. But it is most certainly worth the time you invest in it. When everything wraps up, the cycle is broken, we start a new one. Too bad there will never be a 4th installment, and on the other hand, we don't really need one.
I wish I'd never invented that infernal time machine. It's caused nothing but disaster.
I thank you for watching, and remember, hope is a good thing, maybe even the best of things, and no good thing ever dies. I'll see you on the next video.